Hey there everybody, welcome to another installment of In Defense Of. This week, I'm defending steroids. Now, I'm sure some of you already clicked dislike and probably won't watch the whole video. That's too bad, because I think I actually have a couple good points to make. There are plenty cases of known cheaters, sports that it was rampant in, and even tragedies that have happened because of steroids. I'll get into some of that in a second, but first, I've got just a tiny little disclaimer. You should not take steroids. You are probably not a high-level athlete. If you are, thanks for watching. But really, you probably aren't, and you should not be taking steroids. There are risks involved with taking steroids. And for the vast majority of people, those risks far outweigh any positives they could possibly give you. And if you're young, like 25 and under, it goes double for you. Of course, we always hear it makes your private parts smaller, and sure, that could be a problem, but there's also a lot of studies, and you see a lot of guys who use steroids heavily that die at a young age with heart issues. And when you take it at a young age, when you're before 25 or something like that, you have a lot of hormonal issues because it's throwing all your hormones way out of bounds. So really, for the most part, it's about just doing the work. Arnold wasn't a champion because of steroids. Arnold was a champion because he worked his ass off every single time he was in the gym. He probably worked harder in the gym every day than you've ever worked physically in your life. Not to mention, pretty much everybody he competed against were probably trying it as well, just like all the current guys that win Mr. Olympia are clearly on something. Even college athletes. Less than 1% of college athletes are going to make it to the pros. So it's really most likely going to do more damage than good. And I mean, there's that whole thing about it being illegal to get them without doctor's prescriptions or proper prescriptions. But, you know, who cares about that, right? So, disclaimer aside, this kind of goes back to two main people that I've had arguments about. You probably know both their names, as they were the most successful athletes of the late 90s and early 2000s in Barry Bonds and Lance Armstrong. If there were poster men for steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, it would probably be these two guys. They have been vilified and hated by most, and especially by anybody that's trying to claim purist when they're talking about their sports. Here's a couple points. 1, cheating is bad. 2, people are always going to cheat in sports. 3, there's cheating and there's not necessarily following the rules or the spirit of the rule, but again, not necessarily against the rules either. Sports aren't necessarily unique in people always trying to find an edge, but they are pretty unique in the fact that something like your body actually contributes to your success in that job. Whether it's a new technology or a change in the equipment or some kind of supplement, people are always going to try and find a way to get that next leg up. Sometimes you get caught towing the line, like the Patriots did. 3 times, 4 times, I stopped counting. Sometimes it never gets caught. It will always happen and has always happened in sports. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should just cheat all the time. Obviously, that doesn't make much sense. However, I think especially during those eras of baseball and cycling, I can see why a majority of the guys did cheat. Baseball in particular was going through a rough time. In 1994, there was a strike in baseball. Most teams only played 113 of their scheduled 162 games. Baseball had a strike in 1994 that lost them a lot of fans. Most teams only played 113 of the 162 games that season, and because the strike wasn't resolved until April of the following year, they only played 140 games of the 162 games scheduled that next year as well. As you can imagine, most sports fans don't really take well to billionaires and millionaires arguing about who's going to make more money. A total of 948 games were lost between those two seasons because of the strike. This, combined with the climbing popularity of the NBA in the middle of the Michael Jordan era and the NFL at the tail end of, its successive dynasties in the mid-90s, baseball was losing ground to pretty much every other sport on TV. During the seasons after the strike, home run totals started to climb somewhat rapidly. Players had only hit 50-plus home runs something like 5 or 10 times in the 30 or 40 years prior to the 1997 season. In the late 90s, there was more than 10 a season that were hitting more than 50 home runs. I personally remember the home run chase of Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire in 1998. Pretty much anybody who was older than maybe 9 or 10, 8 at the time probably remembers it because it was on TV everywhere. Everybody was talking about the home run race. Fans love home runs. We all know that. Major League Baseball also liked the home runs because the money was coming in. But so were the steroids. Again, this is where I deviate a little bit from where most people make their arguments. People did start to get suspicious when there was guys that were doubling home run totals from the year before and or weren't power hitters at all, and now they're hitting 30 or 40 home runs a season. And, of course, that's going to make them more money, too. My argument, the league knew these guys were doing it. There's no way they didn't. With as many as 60% or more of their players using steroids at the time, there isn't a way that the teams and the owners and the league didn't know, but they clearly didn't care. Baseball was back on the map. People were watching again. People were going to the stadiums again. So, if there's guys, using needles, we'll just look the other way because guess what? My pocketbooks are full again. I'm not really surprised that players did it, and I don't really blame them either. Professional athletes, by definition, are at the extreme end of competitive people. They have a drive that a lot of people just don't possess. The work it takes to get to be a professional and stay at that level is tremendous, no matter what your talent level is. Here's the situation that I like to pose to people. You're a Major League Baseball player. It's great, but you're like the fifth outfielder. You don't play every day. It's only in situations, but you finally made it to the big league. The problem is, there's guys coming up from the minor leagues that are using steroids, and it looks like you might lose your job soon. So, you've got two choices. You can stick to your morals, right? You can stick to your values, not use the steroids, and possibly lose your job and go back to the minor leagues where they pay you $500 a week to ride on a bus around the country. Or, option B, you start taking the steroids, you finally sign an 8-figure contract, and your family's set for life. And you get to stay in the major leagues, which was your dream since you were like 4. When you think of it that way, how hard of a decision is that really? Even if you know steroids are going to do some damage to you. When you're a professional athlete and you spend that long playing sports, your body's going to be a wreck anyway. So at some point, maybe it doesn't hurt me that much more. Hell, if you gave me a 1 in 3 chance of getting $10 million if I cut a toe off right now, I'll cut 3 of them off and, just cry my way to the hospital while you give me $10 million. The only real problem I have with that area of baseball is the way people kind of arbitrarily pick and choose who they think did and did not do steroids. There are plenty of people who've been caught, and plenty of people who admitted, and plenty of people who were suspicious, but that doesn't mean everybody else gets a pass. I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm a Giants fan. I was a fan of Barry Bonds. So one of the first things people would say when they're like, well, Barry Bonds is going to break the record, everybody's like, well, it's okay. A-Rod will break the record, and he's clean. For years, I said there's no way A-Rod is clean. This is young A-Rod. This is not so young A-Rod. There's a big weight difference there. Could it be natural? Sure. But it wasn't. But every time I said that to people, they're like, no, A-Rod's clean. He didn't do steroids. And now we all know that's not true. But I don't really care. I'll admit it. From the late 80s to the early 2000s, that was the steroid era in baseball. Baseball has had many different eras. They had the dead ball era. There was an era of baseball that had segregation where arguably many of the best athletes weren't even playing in the major leagues. There are ebbs and flows just like there are in every other sport. Things change a little bit, but you kind of just have to accept them as their own parts. Now, if you want to pretend everybody from that era was bad, fine. That sounds like a good choice. But to just say this guy did, this guy didn't, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I've stated for a long time, I'm pretty sure Ken Griffey Jr. also used steroids. Again, we can do young Griffey, old Griffey. I don't think it ever came up, though, because he spent the last half of his career hurt and playing on bad teams. Also, it would have been a lot easier for Cal Ripken to be healthy for 2,600 straight games if he was using steroids, huh? Going back to Bonds for a second, and this would also apply to somebody like Lance Armstrong, I guess, at some point, but some people would say, why would they have to use steroids? Aren't they already the best or one of the best? The answer is yeah. Barry Bonds was arguably the best player of his generation. Again, though, I go back to the whole ego and competitiveness thing. Not only is he a professional athlete, he was the son of a professional baseball player, and his godfather is none other than Willie Mays. So imagine living in the shadows of those two people and trying to make it into the major leagues. A little bit of a chip on your shoulder, even though you're the greatest of your generation? Yeah, maybe. Cycling also had a boom in popularity after Lance Armstrong won 2 or 3 straight Tour de France's. Armstrong was a great story. He overcame cancer and started winning the most grueling race on the planet. Sponsors started to care about the race. It was on ESPN, so people started to watch it. People were buying bikes. People were cycling. Everybody was happy. Again, the cheating and doping in cycling was so widespread, it's very, very doubtful that they didn't know what was going on. Cycling has kind of been on the leading edge of doping in sports for almost its entire history. In the very early days, people were drinking beers beforehand to relax, taking ether, all sorts of weird stuff to try and get to that next level. People now, even though it's much harder to cheat on the doping side, people are getting caught putting micro engines in the hub of their pedals, so it makes them go faster. It's kind of crazy. The most fascinating thing is, if you go back and look at the Tour de France records, all of the wins that Lance Armstrong had were stripped from him, which I guess makes sense. But they didn't award it to the next guy. In fact, there's no winners listed at all for those 7 years. Armstrong himself has said that you'd probably have to go back to 30th place or farther down the list to find somebody who is clean and not doing something. Also, his biggest rival, Jan Ullrich, who finished second to him 3 times, said you might as well give him the titles because everybody else was also doping. Today, there definitely seems to be less steroids and doping and that kind of thing in the major league sports. That being said, it wasn't really by their own choice. As I've pointed out, a lot of fans don't like it when people are cheating. Some of the leagues were also confronted by Congress about cheating in their sports. The NBA, even today, is still kind of teetering on the edge of having Congress step in and force harder rules because they only test 6 times in a whole year. Once those tests are done, 4 in season, 2 off season, once they're done, you know you're not going to get tested again. So it kind of turns into free reign, which isn't quite the best way to do it. The thing that makes it interesting with our major league sports is they all have players' associations that fight for player rights. That's the reason they don't get tested very much, because the players' associations pitch it as an invasion of privacy. So when they draw blood, they can only test for one thing. When they take pee tests, they can test for other things. But they can't do it too often, or else they're going to be invading their privacy. That's why, in my opinion, the leagues really don't care that their players cheat. They're doing just enough to where fans think that they're stopping them from doing these things. But they're not testing them anywhere near somewhere like the Olympics does. The Olympics has testing 365, 24/7. They can call you at any time and you have to show up within 24 hours. And it's a full test. It's blood, it's urine, it's everything. They test for everything. I could talk about the testing procedures for quite a while, but I'll put some links down below to show you some of the different policies that all the leagues have. The leagues don't care about fairness or health, really. They just care about money. And, I mean, they're a business. That's what they're supposed to care about. Also, the players don't care about fairness or health either, or they would force their players' associations to be more stringent on testing. That's a power they have, but they refuse to use it. So, basically, they're still cheating. There's always going to be some form of cheating. I'm not going to say they should just get free reign to do whatever they want in terms of drugs. Especially because once you do that, it starts to leak into the amateur side of stuff, which is where I think there is a hard line of, do everything you can to not have drugs in those sports. Most people in amateur sports have a future in something else. So not damaging their body more than they already are is probably a good thing. For a lot of people, it's easy to point at the player and say he's the bad guy. I don't agree. Sure, there are some players who are stand their ground, not join the other guys who are cheating, and they may get left behind on the path that they've spent their whole life up to that point trying to achieve. Those guys, I feel bad for. I do, because they're just trying to do the right thing. The leagues have the power to fix these problems. But because you're still watching, the pocketbooks are still full, so they're not going to change those policies. Do you agree? Maybe. Probably not. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. maybe I'll make another video addressing whatever you want to bring up that I was wrong about. If you found the video entertaining, please hit that like button. Hit subscribe so when I come out with more content, you'll know right away. But until next time, guys, have a blast.